The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of our old Victorian home, casting dancing shadows across the hardwood floors where Maple loved to stretch out in the sun. Our golden retriever had always been intuitive, sensing changes in our family's emotional tides like a compass needle finding true north. But in the weeks following Grandpa's funeral, her behavior had shifted into something altogether more mysterious. Maple, with her coat the color of autumn leaves and eyes that held ancient wisdom, had begun a ritual that puzzled us all. Each morning, without fail, she would pad down the narrow hallway that led to the guest room and position herself before the ornate mirror that had hung there for as long as I could remember. Her paws would tap against the glass in a gentle, persistent rhythm, as if she were trying to wake someone from a deep sleep. The mirror itself was a relic from another era, its silver backing mottled with age spots, its carved wooden frame dark with the patina of decades. It had belonged to my great-grandmother, or so we'd always been told, and it reflected not just our images but seemed to hold the very essence of our family's history within its depths. "She's grieving too," Mom would say, watching Maple's daily vigil with a mixture of concern and understanding. "Animals feel loss just as deeply as we do." But there was something in Maple's posture, in the way her ears perked forward, and her head tilted with such focused attention, that suggested she wasn't mourning, she was listening. Waiting. Protecting something precious that only she could perceive. 3 weeks after Grandpa's passing, as October painted the maple trees outside in shades of gold and crimson, I witnessed something that would change everything. I had been walking past the hallway mirror when movement caught my eye. Not my own reflection, but something behind it, shadowy and indistinct, like a figure moving through water. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped closer, pressing my face nearly against the cool glass. There, in the silver depths, I could swear I saw the outline of a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing what looked like an old military uniform. The image was fleeting, gone almost as soon as I focused on it, but the impression lingered like smoke after a fire. "Mom!" I called, my voice cracking with excitement and fear. "There's a man inside the mirror." She appeared at my shoulder within moments, her face creased with worry, until she saw me standing there unharmed, staring at my own reflection with wide eyes. I tried to explain what I'd seen, the words tumbling over each other in my urgency. Mom studied the mirror carefully, running her fingers along its edges, tapping gently on the glass. It was then that we both heard it, a hollow sound, different from what we expected. Maple had been watching us from her usual spot, her tail thumping against the floor in what seemed like approval. When our eyes met hers, she stood and pawed at the mirror once more insistently this time, as if to say, "Finally, you're beginning to understand." The decision to remove the mirror from the wall felt monumental, like crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. Mom called my Uncle Rob to help, and together we carefully lifted the heavy piece from its anchoring hooks. Behind it, where we expected to find only plaster and wallpaper, was a wooden panel that didn't match the rest of the wall. The panel was crafted from the same dark wood as the mirror's frame, fitted so seamlessly into the wall that it had been invisible beneath the mirror's shadow. Uncle Rob examined it with the careful attention of someone who had spent decades working with his hands, tracing the barely visible seam with his fingertip. "This was made to be opened," he said quietly. "Look here, these are tiny hinges, painted over, but still functional." With gentle pressure, the panel swung open like a door to the past, revealing a cavity that had been sealed away from light and air for decades. Inside, wrapped in yellowed tissue paper, was a wooden box no larger than a shoebox, its surface worn smooth by countless handlings. Maple pressed against my leg as we carried the box to the kitchen table, her presence both comforting and encouraging. The late afternoon sun streaming through the kitchen windows seemed to hold its breath as Mom lifted the lid with trembling fingers. The contents of the box spilled our family's hidden history across the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle we never knew existed. Photographs with scalloped edges showed faces we didn't recognize, a young woman with kind eyes and auburn hair, a baby in a christening gown, a group of soldiers in World War II uniforms. Letters tied with faded ribbon bore dates from the 1940s, their envelopes addressed in careful script to Raymond at our family's address. But it was the smaller items that made our breath catch. A baby's knitted cap, impossibly tiny and yellowed with age, and a tarnished military medal that caught the light despite its dullness. These weren't just objects, they were talismans of love and loss, carefully preserved by someone who couldn't bear to let them go. Mom's hands shook as she untied the ribbon around the letters. The paper was fragile, threatening to crumble at her touch, but the words written in fading ink were clear enough to read. "I hope this letter finds you well. Lillian is growing so fast. She has your eyes, I think, though it's hard to tell at this age. I wish things could be different, that we could be a proper family, but I understand why that's impossible now. The letter was signed, "With all my love, June," and dated September 15, 1943. Uncle Rob had gone very quiet, his face pale as he studied the photograph of the young woman. When Mom showed him the letter, he sank into a chair as if his legs could no longer support him. "I knew about June," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad mentioned her once, years ago, when he'd had too much to drink on the anniversary of the war's end. Said she was our grandfather's cousin, but that something had happened. I never pressed him for details." He picked up the tarnished metal, turning it over in his weathered hands. "This is a Purple Heart. And this cap," he touched the tiny knitted hat with infinite gentleness, "this belonged to a baby that never came home." The following week brought an unexpected visitor to our door. Miles Tanner was a man in his 90s, bent with age but with eyes still sharp and clear. He had read about our family in a letter to the editor that Mom had written to the local newspaper, asking if anyone remembered a woman named June from the 1940s. "I served with your grandfather Raymond in the Pacific," Miles explained, settling carefully into our living room chair while Maple positioned herself at his feet, sensing his importance to our story. "But I also knew him before the war, and I knew June Whitmore." Miles's weathered hands painted pictures with his words as he told us about June, how she had worked as a seamstress in town, how she and Raymond had fallen in love during a brief leave before he shipped out, how she had discovered she was pregnant after he'd already gone overseas. June was barely 18, and in those days, well, things were different for unmarried mothers. Her family sent her away to have the baby. When Raymond came back from the war, he was a changed man. We all were. The guilt he carried about June and little Lillian ate at him for the rest of his life. Miles paused, his eyes distant with memory. "He tried to find them, you know. Spent years searching. But June's family had covered their tracks well. It wasn't until much later that he learned what had happened to them." The old soldier's voice grew heavy with sorrow. "Lillian never made it past her first birthday. June, she grieved herself into an early grave not long after. Raymond kept those letters, those mementos, as the only proof that they had existed, that they had mattered." Armed with Miles's revelations, we turned our attention to the forgotten corners of our old house. The attic, accessible only by a narrow ladder and shrouded in decades of dust and cobwebs, had always been a repository for items too precious to discard, but too painful to keep close. Maple, despite her usual reluctance to climb stairs, insisted on accompanying us into the cramped space beneath the eaves. Her golden coat caught the light from our flashlights as she navigated between trunks and boxes with purpose, leading us to a corner where the roof slanted lowest. Hidden behind a stack of Christmas decorations from the 1960s, we found a suitcase that looked like it had traveled across oceans. Inside were more letters from June, these dated later than the ones we'd found behind the mirror. Her handwriting grew increasingly shaky with each dated entry, but her love for both Raymond and their daughter remained constant. December 1944. Lillian said her first word today. Dada. I pretend she means you, Raymond, though she's never seen your face except in the photograph I keep by her crib. March 1945. She's walking now. Into everything. I wish you could see how she claps her hands when she laughs. She has your stubborn chin and my restless spirit. The final letters grew darker, speaking of Lillian's illness, of June's desperate prayers and failed treatments. The last entry, dated October 1945, was brief and heartbreaking. Raymond, our angel has gone home to God. I don't know how to continue without her light in the world. Please remember us as we were in love, not as we are in sorrow. In the days that followed our attic discovery, Maple's behavior took on a new urgency. She would no longer content herself with pawing at the mirror. Instead, she began leading us outside, down the gravel path that wound behind our house, into the woods that had been part of our property for generations. The October forest was a cathedral of color, with sugar maples and birches forming a canopy of gold and amber above our heads. Maple moved through the undergrowth with the confidence of someone following a familiar trail, pausing occasionally to ensure we were keeping pace with her determined gait. Half a mile into the woods, where the cultivated landscape of our yard gave way to truly wild forest, Maple stopped beside a grove of young birch trees. The ground here was slightly raised, forming a natural mound barely visible beneath decades of fallen leaves and forest debris. But as we knelt beside our faithful guide, brushing away the accumulated organic matter, we found what she had led us to find. A small headstone, no larger than a book, emerged from the earth. The inscription, though weathered by 60 years of New England seasons, was still legible. Maple sat beside the tiny grave with a dignity that took my breath away, her golden head bowed as if in prayer. She had known, somehow, that this child's resting place needed to be acknowledged, needed to be found by those who would remember her with love. Beneath the small headstone, wrapped in oilcloth that had somehow survived decades of weather, we found one more letter. This one was addressed not to Raymond, but to those who find this place. June's words, written in the careful script of someone who knew it might be her last letter, asked for something simple yet profound. If you are reading this, then Lillian has not been forgotten. That gives me more peace than I ever dared hope for. I ask only one thing: let her story be told. Let her be known not as a secret to be hidden, but as a child who was deeply loved, if only for a brief, shining moment. She deserves to be remembered as part of your family's story, because she was, and always will be, a part of your grandfather's heart. The letter was dated November 1945, just a month before June herself passed away from what the local obituary would list as, quote, consumption, though Miles had told us it was really a broken heart that killed her. As we knelt beside Lillian's grave that day, with Maple keeping faithful watch beside us, Mom made a promise that would reshape our family's understanding of itself. We'll make sure your story is told, little one. We'll make sure you're remembered. True to her word, Mom began working with the local historical society the very next week. Mrs. Peterson, the society's elderly president, had lived in our town her entire life and remembered whispers about June Whitmore, though she had been just a child herself during the war years. There were rumors, Mrs. Peterson confirmed, as she helped us navigate the process of officially registering Lillian's grave. Hushed conversations between the church ladies about a girl who had gone away and come back changed, but no one spoke of it openly. That wasn't the way things were done then. The paperwork to have Lillian's burial site officially recognized and protected took weeks, but it gave us time to tend to the small grave properly. We cleared away decades of forest growth, planted wildflowers that would bloom each spring, and installed a small fence to mark the sacred space. Maple supervised every aspect of our work, as if she had appointed herself guardian of Lillian's memory. She would position herself beside the headstone while we worked, occasionally placing a paw on the stone as if offering comfort to the child who lay beneath. When the local newspaper published our story in their Sunday edition, the response was overwhelming. Mrs. Rodriguez from the diner remembered her grandmother mentioning a seamstress named June, who had done beautiful work before disappearing suddenly. Tom Harrison, whose family had run the funeral home for 3 generations, found records of a small burial in 1945 that had been paid for by R. Morrison, our grandfather's initials. Most surprising was the call from Dr. Sarah Chen, a genealogist who had been researching families affected by World War II. She had come across mentions of June Whitmore in military correspondence and had been trying to piece together her story for a thesis on wartime families. Your discovery is incredibly significant, Dr. Chen explained during her visit to our home. So many stories like June and Lillian's were lost because families were ashamed or afraid. By bringing this to light, you're helping to complete the historical record of how the war affected everyone, not just the soldiers who fought. With Dr. Chen's help, we began assembling a comprehensive archive of June and Lillian's story, complete with copies of all the letters, photographs, and official documents we could locate. The Historical Society agreed to house the collection permanently, ensuring that future generations would be able to learn about this chapter of our community's past. The idea for the book came to Mom during one of our evening walks with Maple through the woods to visit Lillian's grave. As we watched our faithful dog place her daily offering, usually a stick or interesting leaf, beside the small headstone, Mom realized that our story wasn't just about the past, but about how the past reaches into the present when we're willing to listen. Letters from the Mirror began as a family memoir but evolved into something larger, a meditation on love, loss, and the ways that secrets, even well-intentioned ones, can echo through generations. Mom wrote in the early morning hours before work, often with Maple curled at her feet, as if our golden guardian was still overseeing the project that had begun with her mysterious behavior at the hallway mirror. The writing process took nearly a year, during which we made several more discoveries. While cleaning out Grandpa's old recliner, a chair that Maple had always avoided, we found his journal wedged between the cushions. The entries, dating from the 1970s and 80s, revealed the depth of his regret about June and Lillian, and his multiple attempts to locate them over the years. April 15, 1978. Drove past the old Whitmore place again today. New family living there now, kids playing in the yard where June used to sit and sew. Part of me wants to stop and ask if they know what happened to her, but what would be the point? Some sorrows are too deep to share with strangers. October 12, 1982. Had another dream about Lillian. She would be almost 40 now if she had lived. Would she have my stubborn streak, or June's gentle nature? I pray she knows, wherever she is, that she was wanted. That she was loved. The most significant discovery came 6 months into writing the book, when a woman named Evelyn Morrison contacted us through the Historical Society. She was in her 70s, with silver hair and eyes the same deep blue as Grandpa Raymond's had been. I think, she said carefully during our first phone conversation, that Raymond Morrison was my father. Evelyn's story unraveled another layer of our family's hidden history. She was the daughter Raymond had had with his wife, my grandmother, but she had been given up for adoption as an infant, due to circumstances no one in the family had ever discussed. I've been searching for my birth family for 20 years, Evelyn explained when she visited our home, with Maple immediately adopting her as another member of our pack. When I saw the newspaper article about your discoveries, I recognized the name and decided to take a chance. Evelyn brought with her a letter she had received from a lawyer after Raymond's death, a letter he had written but never sent, explaining the truth about both June and Lillian, and about his regret at giving up Evelyn for adoption. My dear daughter, the letter began, I have made many mistakes in my life, but the greatest was not fighting harder to keep you with us. Your mother and I were young and frightened, and we let others convince us that you would be better off with a family that could give you advantages we couldn't provide. Not a day has passed that I haven't wondered about you, hoped for you, loved you from afar. The letter went on to tell Evelyn about June and Lillian, about the love he had lost, and the guilt he had carried, and about his hope that someday, all the fragments of his scattered family might find their way back together. Anna Rodriguez, a documentary filmmaker from Boston, contacted us after reading an early excerpt from Mom's book in a literary magazine. She was immediately drawn to the story of how Maple had guided us to these discoveries, and how an animal's intuition had helped heal wounds that had festered for generations. There's something so powerful about the idea that love persists beyond death, beyond secrets, beyond time itself, Anna explained during our first meeting. And the fact that it was your dog who served as the catalyst for these revelations, it speaks to the deep connections between all living beings. The filming process took several months, with Anna capturing not just our interviews and the physical locations that were important to our story, but also the changing seasons around Lillian's grave and Maple's continued devotion to watching over it. The resulting documentary, titled The Guardian's Secret, would eventually win awards at film festivals across the country. But more importantly, it helped spread June and Lillian's story beyond our small town, touching viewers who had their own family secrets and hidden sorrows. The response was overwhelming. Letters from people who had been inspired to research their own family histories, to ask the hard questions, and seek the difficult truths that previous generations had chosen to bury. While Anna was filming, we decided to make one final search of the property for any remaining clues to our family's hidden past. The old shed behind the house had always been Grandpa's domain, filled with tools and gardening supplies and the accumulated detritus of decades of rural living. It was Maple, of course, who led us to the corner where Grandpa had built a false bottom into an old workbench. Hidden beneath a layer of rusted tools, we found a wooden box, similar to the one we'd discovered behind the mirror. This one contained items that belonged not to June and Lillian, but to James Milton, the man June had eventually married in 1947, 2 years after Lillian's death. The marriage certificate showed that June had tried to build a new life after losing her daughter. But letters from James revealed that she had never fully recovered from her losses. The final letter in the collection, dated 1949, was from James to a friend, describing June's death and his decision to honor her final request to be buried near Lillian. She spoke of the baby constantly in those last weeks, James had written. Said she could hear her calling from the woods behind the Morrison place. I thought it was the fever talking, but now I wonder. Maybe love really does transcend death, and she was simply ready to go where her daughter was waiting. Following the clues in James's letters, we found June's burial site in a small, forgotten cemetery about 2 miles from Lillian's grave. Her headstone was simple, giving only her name and dates, but someone, presumably James, had planted a rosebush beside it that had grown wild over the decades. Near June's grave, we discovered items that she must have left there herself in her final visits to the cemetery. A small wooden toy, a pressed flower, and a note in her familiar handwriting that simply said, "I'm coming home to you, my darling." It was a circle completed, a story finally told in full. June and Lillian, separated by death but united in memory, were no longer hidden secrets, but acknowledged members of our family's history. The official launch of Letters from the Mirror took place at the local history museum on a crisp October morning, exactly 2 years after Maple had first begun pawing at the hallway mirror. The museum had created a permanent exhibit featuring the letters, photographs, and artifacts we had discovered, along with information about the broader historical context of families affected by World War II. Evelyn, now fully embraced as a member of our family, gave a speech about the importance of facing difficult truths and healing old wounds. Dr. Chen presented research showing how our discoveries had contributed to a broader understanding of wartime families. Anna's documentary was screened for the first time, bringing many in the audience to tears. But the most moving moment came when Miles Tanner, now in his 90s and using a wheelchair, was wheeled forward to place a wreath on the museum's memorial to Lillian. His weathered hands shook as he saluted the memory of his friend Raymond and the family that Raymond had never been able to claim in life. "Some stories," Miles said in his quavering voice, "are too important to stay buried. This little girl, this brave young woman, they deserve to be remembered not as secrets, but as part of the great tapestry of human love and loss." Throughout the ceremony, Maple stayed close by my side, her golden coat now touched with gray around her muzzle, her movements a little slower than they once had been. But her presence was as steady and comforting as ever, a living reminder of how love and loyalty can guide us toward truth. As autumn deepened into winter and then turned toward spring, we began to notice changes in Maple. She still made her daily pilgrimages to Lillian's grave, but her steps were slower, her breath came harder after the walk through the woods. The veterinarian confirmed what we already knew in our hearts. Our faithful guardian was nearing the end of her journey. On a warm May morning, as the wildflowers we had planted around Lillian's grave were beginning to bloom, Maple made her final visit to the small headstone. She lay down beside it in the dappled sunlight that filtered through the birch leaves, her breathing peaceful and steady. Mom and I sat with her there, our hands gentle on her golden coat, as she slowly drifted into sleep. It seemed fitting somehow that she would choose to end her journey in the place where she had led us to such profound discoveries, where she had served as guardian to a child she had never met, but had somehow known needed protection. We buried Maple beneath the old apple tree behind our house, the one that had been Grandpa's favorite spot for morning coffee and evening reflection. The tree bloomed with particular beauty that spring, its branches heavy with white and pink blossoms that seemed to dance in every breeze. Standing beside Maple's grave, on that first evening after her passing, I felt the profound truth that had run through our entire journey. Love transcends the boundaries we think define our existence. Maple had guided us to uncover the hidden stories of June and Lillian, not because she understood the historical significance, but because she recognized the persistent power of love to reach across time and space, seeking acknowledgement and peace. The mirror in our hallway, now returned to its place but no longer hiding secrets, reflects not just our daily lives, but the deeper truth that we are all connected by invisible threads of compassion, loyalty, and memory. June's love for Lillian, Raymond's guilt and longing, Maple's inexplicable knowledge of what needed to be found, all of it part of a larger story about how the heart remembers what the mind tries to forget. In the months that followed, our small town became a destination for people seeking their own hidden family stories, drawn by the documentary and the book that had grown from one dog's mysterious behavior. The Historical Society reported a dramatic increase in genealogical research requests, and several other families discovered their own buried secrets and hidden connections. But for me, the most important discovery wasn't in the past at all. It was in the present moment, understanding that love, like energy, can never be destroyed, only transformed. It echoes through generations, guides faithful dogs to forgotten graves, and whispers truths through mirrors that have kept secrets too long. On quiet evenings, when the setting sun paints the woods gold and amber, I sometimes walk the path that Maple first showed us, ending at the small grave where wildflowers now bloom each spring. There, in the peaceful grove where a child's memory has finally found its voice, I understand that every story of love, no matter how brief, no matter how hidden, adds something irreplaceable to the great symphony of human experience. And sometimes, in the gentle rustle of leaves or the distant call of birds settling in for the night, I can almost hear them all, June's lullabies, Lillian's laughter, Raymond's whispered apologies, and Maple's contented sighs as she keeps watch over the love that brought us all together. The mirror no longer hides secrets, but it still reflects truth. The truth that we are all guardians of memory, all connected by bonds that neither time nor death can sever. All part of a story much larger and more beautiful than we ever dared imagine.